Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 74, and today we're going to talk about theory crafting and build-arounds. And we're going to use the new released set to address those topics. But before we go into that, I would like to thank my sponsors. And obviously, my foremost sponsor is mtgazone.com, where I write some articles, and I would recommend you visit it on occasions. But it's not my only sponsor. I also have a Patreon, and I would like to thank Mike and Pat for joining the Patreon the last couple of weeks. So thanks for that, and of course thanks to all the other patrons. And with that out of the way, we can move on to the actual topic of the conversation. Not. Because I always start with the preamble, although today's preamble is linked to the actual topic of the presentation. So my preamble today is that building around is all about seeing best case scenarios and attacking them. And what I mean by that is that sometimes you see cards that look like they are having a potential to be a build around, and I see them probably way too often. The problem with seeing them too often is that you try build arounds that are just not working. And most of those build-arounds you can possibly eliminate just by looking at the card and the neighborhood of those cards and the environment that they have to operate in, and maybe exclude them before you even start drafting. So what I like to do when I start thinking about a build-around is I want to see the best case scenario, the sort of magic fairyland situation. And then I try to imagine how this magic land scenario can be interrupted. What are the problems with putting it together? For example, if all the cards that I'm interested in a build around are on rare or higher rarities, I know that chaining 3 rares in the same draft is not going to be realistic, and I can exclude this build around as a possibility quite early. Obviously, sometimes you will draw those 3 rounds, and it's good that you're ready for that. But obviously, everyone's time is limited, so you don't want to spend too much energy on thinking about something that may happen once in 1,000 drafts when you're planning to play 50 drafts in a format, or maybe in 30 drafts in a format. But some of those build-arounds can actually happen more frequently, and I'm going to look at some of those at least today. So there are different types of build-arounds, and I would like to focus on 3 types that I identified. One is an all-in build-around, and that is all cards in the deck have to play to the same theme. If you played Ravnica Allegiance, a classic all-in build-around was the no-win con deck that was based on a card that was returning your graveyard back into the library. And you played lots of cards that did not much, just stopped opponent from winning. And you played them accrued card advantage. At some stage when you were half through your deck, you played that card, shuffled your graveyard into the library, and repeated the process. And if you did it frequently enough, opponent was left with no cards in their library, and you basically won without even playing a single threat. That strategy was interesting because it was open for a long time. It was good against what other decks were trying to do. They tried to attack you with creatures. They tried to be quite simplistic in their plan. And also, the important cards that were for those decks were not wanted by anyone else. So you could get them as much as you wanted. There are a couple of all-in build-arounds in this format. And one reason for that is that companions do exist in the multiverse legend slot of the pack. And I think that some of those companion strategies are going to be actually possible to draft if the cards align properly. There is another type of a build around, and I think that this one is going to be very important in this format. And these are what I call pocket of synergy build arounds. What I mean by that is that you build your normal deck. Let's say you build a white-red aggro, and we're going to talk about this specific example a couple of times because I think that red-white aggro is weirdly full of build arounds this time around. But you draft a card that has high synergy if you put particular cards. Maybe you wouldn't put those cards normally, but if you have a particular combination of cards, those cards are suddenly elevated from maybe playables into actually quite good cards if the conditions are going to be right. And there is another type of build arounds, and that's expanding on existing theme. And these will be the cards that will supplement the themes that you already have, but having them gives you this additional possibility of adding extra synergies. Some formats are going to be less synergistic and based on pure sheer power, and some formats are going to be slightly more synergistic. Looking at the spoiler for this card and looking at the additional cards from the Multiverse Legends, I think that this format is going to be, you are going to gain a lot by putting a couple of synergies into your deck. So yeah, how do you want to start theory crafting a build around? And that's the question that we're going to have. So first of all, you want to pick a card. And here, as an example, I picked Zada Hedron Grinder. We're going to go deeper on that card and try to see how to build a build around based on it, basically. Zada Hedron Grinder is a 3 and red, a legendary creature, goblin ally. It's a 3/3. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only Zada, copy that spell for each other creature you control that this spell could target. And each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So this is a poor card on its own as a vanilla because it's a hill giant and a legendary hill giant for that. So 4 mana 3/3 is not something that you want to play in the modern limited. But the ability can be quite strong. Now, the question is, which cards would make it stronger? So we have a card that has potential powerful synergy and potential multiple card interactions. Nice thing about this type of build around is that at least initially, and maybe against some players that are not so invested for quite a long time in this format, those plans can be unexpected and people might be underprepared for them. And it's also important that you select cards for your build around that are slightly underdrafted, because obviously, if a card is good on its own, it's going to be heavily drafted. And if the cards that are needed for the strategy to succeed are heavily drafted, you might have a problem with, even if you first pick the card that you think you can build around, you might have a problem with building a coherent deck because you're going to be robbed of the card that you want to play. So you want to look at the cards that are underdrafted. Of course, at this stage of the format, we have no idea what's going to be underdrafted and overdrafted, but at least to me, Zada looks like a card that's not going to be picked particularly highly because, again, in most decks, it's going to be just a 3/3 hill giant. And also, I looked through the spoiler, and there's not a huge amount of cards that are going to be extremely powerful. Obviously, someone is telling me that LSV was playing 2 times Zada with 2 times Aerial Boost earlier. It was very strong. Obviously, Aerial Boost is one of the cards that I was thinking about when I was looking at the Zada build. So yeah, clearly. LSV knows how to build around. LSV knows how to figure out those things. And I know that probably at least some of you come from LSV stream. And yeah, he can play, shockingly. So step 2 is identifying the pieces that will help with your plan. And Zada has one card that is absolutely busted with it, and that's Storm the Siege-Core. Because Storm the Siege-Core is a 2 green sorcery, and it says distribute 4+1/+1 counters among up to 4 target creatures you control. Creatures you control gain vigilance and trample until end of turn. It says up to 4, which means it can be 1. If you choose 1 and target only Zada, then the ability of Zada will trigger, which means that Zada will get +4+1/+1 counters, but so will every other creature that you have, which means that you do a 4 mana better than overrun card when you have Zada on the play. Obviously, to do that, you don't only need to have Zada, but you need to have other creatures. But even with 3 creatures on the board, if you make a bunch of 7/7s or 6/6s, they are vigilant and they have trample, you probably are going to finish this game quite easily. Apart from Storm the Siege-Core in green, you have a couple of other cards that can support it. One is Arachnoid Adaptation. That's a 1 mana instant. Target creature gets +2/+2 and gains reach until end of turn. Untap it. This one has a cool interaction because you can sort of overcome one of the potential issues of the deck with Zada. So the problem is obviously that you play Zada on turn 4, it gets killed, and all your combo is gone. If you have Arachnoid Adaptation that costs only 1 mana, what you can do is you can play Zada, attack with all your creatures. During combat, you play Arachnoid Adaptation, targeting Zada, all your creatures untap, all your creatures get +2/+2. So we got like this sort of 1 mana mini overrun effect, which is quite strong. Another card that I think might be potentially good with Zada is Vengeance Earth. That's a 2-mana instant. Target creature or land you control becomes a 4/4 elemental creature with haste in addition to its other types until end of turn. It must be blocked this turn if able. And this means that, first of all your creatures will become 4/4s. And second of all your creatures will have to be blocked this turn, which means that probably most of them will not be capable of being double blocked, which means that you might eat a huge portion of the board of the opponent, because obviously if you have relatively equal number of creatures, each of them will have to be blocked, which will leave not much for double blocking. So yeah, this is potential pieces that Zada can collaborate with in green. But it's not only green that it can collaborate. Obviously, there are some red cards, but actually red does not support Zada in so many ways. As Mike Provencher said before, LSV is playing Zada with Aerial Boost, which is a white card. And indeed, white cards are also quite good with Zada. There is Angelic Intervention, which puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature and gives it protection from a color of your choice. So you play it on Zada, give it protection to the color that is most annoying on the opposite side. And all your other creatures get protection and the counter from that Angelic Intervention, which is great. There is Aerial Boost. This is a convoke spell, so you can cast it by tapping other creatures, but probably you don't want to do that as you basically want to attack with everything that you can. And Aerial Boost gives a creature +2/+2 and flying until end of turn, so all your creatures will become +2/+2 and flyers, which very frequently will end the game. And then there's another potential card. It's not as good as an interaction as the other ones because it's not as offensive. But there's Scroll Shift, which is a 3-mana instant that exiles up to one target artifact, creature, or enchantment you control, and then you return it to the battlefield under its owner control, and you draw a card. And this means that if you have 5 creatures, you can basically phase them out or blink them, and you draw 5 cards, which is quite good. And this will potentially find you other pieces that will work together with Zada, obviously, on another turn. So these are like basic things that will make Zada good. And then you need to surround it with other support cards that will make sure that the synergy is not wasted. And this is where the trick lies, because it's very easy to build like an all-in Zada deck, but what are you going to do when you don't draw your Zada? And that's the big problem in all the build-arounds. Build-arounds are having problems if you don't have pieces that will support them. So I think that there are several cards that will be working quite well with the type of gameplay that you want to have when you have Zada in your deck. One example, Alabaster Host Sanctifier. This creature has lifelink, and since most of the abilities that we were talking about boost creatures' power and toughness, giving lifelink to something, giving power to something with lifelink is going to make your racing much more efficient. Because you will have those combat tricks, but not necessarily Zada. Alabaster Host Sanctifier is going to be also great if you send it in the air and attack the opponent for 4 and gain 4 life. Give yourself a cushion to draw into the pieces of the combo that you need. Another card that I find attractive for this kind of game is Knight of the New Coalition. It's a 3 and a white human knight with vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, it creates a 2/2 white and blue knight creature token with vigilance. So it produces 2 bodies. And obviously, because Zada's effect affects all your creatures, the more creatures you have, the better. So Knight of the New Coalition is quite a good combination there, as it gives you multiple bodies. But for example, it has a minor synergy with where's my laser? Minor synergy with Scroll Shift, which blinks a creature. So if you don't have Zada, you can blink your Knight of the New Coalition. You generate another knight, you draw a card, and that's a pretty decent way of spending 3 mana. Also, the knight can block, so you can basically block something, blink your knight, the knight survives, you get another 2/2, and the next turn you're ready to go. And another card that might be useful is Krasus Depth Guard, because it's a cheap creature that is pretty good in defense as a 4/3, because few people want to attack into it, so it can give you that extra time. But because you, again, are working on effects that are pumping power, Krasus Depth Guard has Defender, but as long as it has power 5 or greater, it can attack as though it didn't. So, for example, if you have your Angelic Intervention, you can put a counter on Krasus Depth Guard, and it becomes permanently a 5/4 that can attack, so a creature that you're quite interested in having. So these are just examples, and I'm pretty sure that you will put all the good uncommons, all the rares and color removal and things like that. But these are particularly enhanced by your secret side plan of this pocket of synergy with Zada. That's why I told them. But also you can ensure the plan B. Now, white-red is a color of backup. Therefore, you probably want to plan to have those backup creatures around you. And of course, you can put a thing like Mirror Shield Hoplite, red and a white 2/2 with vigilance. And that says whenever a creature you control becomes the target of backup ability, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy. This ability triggers only once each turn. So that means that if you play a backup ability, so backup ability being put a +1/+1 counter on the creature, and if it's not the creature that has the backup, the other creature gains some abilities from it. Like, for example, Sigil Sentinel, the 2 and a white human knight with vigilance, that has a backup, so it can actually give the +1/+1 counter to something else, and that something else gains vigilance until end of turn. And backup obviously also works very well with things like Krasus Depth Guard, because it makes it able to attack by putting the counter. It works with things like Alabaster Host Sanctifier, because if it becomes 3/3 or 4/4 lifelinker, that's going to be really, really difficult for other people to race. So you build this kind of neat package of aggressive deck with some grindy capacity, with some combos that are built around backup. But on top of that, you have Zada and maybe 2-3 of those payoffs that I told you. Maybe 2 angelic interventions and 1 aerial boost, or 2 aerial boosts and 1 angelic intervention, which give you this potential of having very explosive plays that opponent doesn't necessarily expect. Much better. Now, Zada was a build-around that is not an all-in build-around. You can build a perfectly functional red-white deck without putting Zada. You can cut Zada if you don't get enough pieces, you think. You can cut Zada if you think that your more coherent and less combo-y deck will play better, because you have really good playables, and this other package might be actually weakening it, because it will rely too much on drawing that one particular card. But of course, Zada is an uncommon, which means having 2 of it is not going to be something that will happen rarely. It actually might happen quite frequently. So it's good to know it. It's good to have it in your repertoire. And it's good to know that it exists also on the other side of the battlefield. When opponents start doing weird things, you might think, I think that they're planning a turn when they are going to send everything in the air and win like this. However, there are cards that require a full build round, or at least can require a full build round, because Karuga is going to be also fine in your main deck in some of the decks, but Karuga can be a full build around because of the companion rule. And obviously, since most of the people here, I hopefully, are limited players, you maybe don't know companion, but companion means if you fulfill certain conditions, you can play it in a special companion zone, and you can bring it to your hand for 3 mana, and then you can cast it. So you'll always have access to that card, which is great, because again, this solves one of the biggest problems with build-arounds, is that you put a card and you never draw it, and you have all those pieces that are synergistic with it, but they are maybe not as powerful without the card that you need to draw with them. Karuga doesn't have that problem if you build a deck that Karuga can be companioned in. There is one problem with that. One problem with that is that there are rules for each companion, and Karuga has a rule that your starting deck cannot contain cards with mana value less than 3. And that is a big problem because I think everyone that played a bit of limited knows that 2-drops are important, and if you have Karuga, 2-drops are not a thing that you're going to have in your deck. So building around a deck like Karuga requires much more thought than the deck that contains Zada, because you need to make sure that every single piece of your deck contributes to the Karuga plan, and that includes how can I substitute those 2-drops? What can I do if opponent has explosive starts, if the format is fast? You need to identify what are your highest weakness, and you need to weigh the potential against the drawbacks of playing such a card. Now, obviously, I am going to draft Karuga like crazy if I open it in the pack 1, and I will do everything in my power to be able to draft it as a companion. But that's just because I sometimes like to play drafts that maybe are not the best thing to do, but they are definitely the most fun thing to try to do. But even though fun is important, it's also nice to win. So I will put some thought on how to build Karuga decks before I even start approaching it. So if I open Karuga, and I hopefully will at some stage, I know exactly what to look for. I know exactly what my problems will be, and I will try to dedicate my whole draft to fill the gaps in those weaknesses, and to maximize my chances of doing something useful. So obviously the weaknesses of a Karuga companion build around is that you don't have any early interaction and you don't have 2-drops, and then being on the draw, it might be problematic to win games because you will have your first play quite late and one removal away. You're basically one removal away from being too far behind in the game. So you need to make sure that you are going to build your deck to minimize the chances of that happening. And potentially, I would also advise you to roll a lot of 20s on the who's going to start kind of roll. Potential is there because Karuga is a great mid-range card. I mean, I read the companion rules, I didn't read the rest. It's a 5-mana 5/4, and when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card for each other permanent with you control with mana value 3 or greater. So that tells me like one thing: you want to have a lot of permanents because if you draw like 3-4 cards with Karuga and put this large body, you are instantly favored in that game, even though you started on the back foot by not having any 2-drops. There is a potential in it also that the first 2 turns, you don't care about them that much because you're not going to be able to play any spells most of the time. So you can do stuff that other decks maybe don't have that easy access to. Meme value, very important. Don't forget about the meme value, especially when you're creating any sort of content. It's nice to be able to show those kind of meme decks an interesting place because it will gather you following and it will increase your visibility. But also the obvious thing that we might forget is that Karuga is an extra card in your starting hand. It will cost you 3 mana, but it technically is an 8 mana creature with that ability. It's just a split over several turns. But it's something that you shouldn't ignore. So solutions to the problems. And I thought about several solutions to the problem that Karuga has. And first and foremost, card that I want to prioritize over anything in a Karuga deck is Ephara's Dispersal. It's a 2 and a blue instant, so 3 mana, fulfills the Karuga criterion, but it has also this spell cost 2 less to cast if it targets an attacking creature. And this is great because it means that even if you're on the draw, you can bounce one of the creatures on turn 2, and you only pay 1 mana, but it still allows you to companion Karuga. And if you do that small shift, then your deck is probably on a good way to stabilizing the game. And if you stabilize the game over the time, you should be favored because Karuga is powerful. Also, you Surveil too, which allows you to get some card selection, and that's also great because one thing that you cannot afford in Karuga deck is missing land drops. So I would probably recommend you playing 18 lands, and I would definitely want to make sure that I don't keep dodgy 2-land hands if possible. There are other things that are a sort of solution to the problems that having only 3 drops in your deck creates, and one of them is the cycle of the plane of the basic land cycling cards in this format. Every color has one common that has a plane cycling, mountain cycling, swamp cycling, etc. So you can pay 2 mana and discard this card and search your library for a basic land of a specified type and put it in your hand. This sorts 2 problems. You can do something on turn 2, which is great because you are not completely sitting idly with your mana not being utilized, and it allows you splashing and allows you not missing land drops, 2 things that you can be interested in such a build. And also cards like Alabaster Host Intercessor, the 5 and a white Plane Cycler in the format are actually quite good because that's a 6 mana 3/4, and when it enters the battlefield, you exile creature opponent controls until it leaves the battlefield. So if you get to the 6 mana, you can actually swing the board state in your favor by playing this one creature. Also, if you have multiples of those, you can cycle the first one and then you can play the other ones because you brought your planes. The other thing that this deck can do much better than other decks is playing the tap lands. Those tap lands gain you 1 life, which is actually important because it does slightly help you survive. But also it allows you to fix your mana or to splash your mana, and you can play them in the first 2 turns with not much cost, which is great. So I would prioritize those lands if I was playing a Karuga build, because since Karuga costs hybrid mana only of color, you can imagine having a Karuga deck that is green-red, or maybe green-blue, or maybe green-white, or blue-white. World is your oyster, and definitely you can play some sort of 3-color concoctions using that card. So these 3 categories of cards, one that is actually cheaper in specific situation than the mana cost suggests, one that can be used on turn 2 to bring a land and later in the game to stabilize the board, and one that gives you access to something that other decks might be slightly worried of having, and that means tapped mana base. All these cards are good for Karuga decks because their drawbacks are slightly less pronounced to you than to other decks in the format. Second of all, because you can only start playing 3-drops, you better make sure that you have those 3-drops, because there is no worse thing in Karuga deck than playing your 3rd land and realizing you have nothing to do. And I put 3 examples of creatures that I thought would be good in a Karuga build. One is Mutagen Connoisseur. That's a 1 green and a blue 0/5 flyer with vigilance. And I think that the most important part of it for the Karuga build is the 5 toughness, because it means that you can play it and you can block for some time with that creature unless it becomes unless opponent uses a removal on it. And that's not always going to be the case. So it sort of helps you stabilize, and then later in the game, it can actually become a clock when you transform a couple of permanents. Second thing that I would be interested in is Overgrown Pest, and it's mainly because it is a body. It costs 3 mana, and it looks at the top 5 cards of your library, and you may reveal a land or a double-faced card from among them and put it in your hand. And in this deck, probably a lot of the time, I'm going to be interested in getting that extra land, because that means that I definitely have a 4-drop, and then I can play my 4-drop. And again, I want those 4-drops to be the things that will stabilize me. And right now we can speculate, but as soon as the data comes in, the big data, you can analyze which cards are the best in slowing down your opponent, and these are going to be the prime 3-drops for the Karuga build. And also I selected Preening Champion. That's a 3 mana 2/2 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 blue and red elemental creature token. And it's a great card, don't get me wrong. It will be good aggressively in Knight's deck. It won't be something that you will be able to pick up easily. But the most important part of it in this deck is the fact that it generates 2 bodies, which means that you play a 3-drop, and even if the opponent has removal, you still have a chump blocker that will prolong the game again and will allow you to survive longer. And the longer you survive, the higher the chance that you're going to play Karuga and accrue the value related to playing a 5/4 that draws you a bunch of cards. Another thing that this deck can do probably better than any other is splashing. and that gives you access to bombs that might be going later in packs 2 and 3. I'm talking about cards like Glissa, Herald of Predation. I can imagine that you're going to get it pick 4, pick 5 on in pack 3 if none of your neighbors has been drafting strictly Gorgari. And you will always have possibility of somehow splashing it. I'm pretty sure of that. I'm talking about card like Borborygmus and Fibbletip, who need 3 colors, and you're going to be in a very good position to splash the 3rd color that you need and be able to play that card. These also should go slightly later in pack 3. Or cards like Hidetsugu and Kairi, which are both heavy on blue and require blue-black. If you are on the green-blue version of Karuga deck, I'm sure you're going to have enough islands to play a blue-blue card, and you can get enough black sources to be able to splash for Hidetsugu and Kairi. And again, you gain access to a very powerful card. All those things are possible in other archetypes, but I think, again, that the Karuga build is going to be specifically tuned to be capable of playing such combinations. Right, so this was an example of a pocket of synergy build around and of a all-in build around. And now I'm going to talk a bit about a couple of cards I selected from March of the Machine that might be decent build-arounds on their own right. And this one won't come too often because it's a mythic, but Monastery Mentor is a 2 and a white human monk with 2/2 stats. It has prowess, but it always also has whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 monk creature token with prowess. So it's a powerful effect, but you want to maybe think carefully about cards that are gaining a lot of value when you're playing Monastery Mentor. And a couple of cards I'm selecting here are Sunder the Gateway, and that's a 1 and a white sorcery, and you can either destroy target non-token artifact or enchantment an opponent controls and incubate 2, or you can incubate 2 and then transform an incubator token you control. So you can play it and you have a 2/2. But the advantage of it is, of course, that you play it and you have a 2/2, but at the same time you play the non-creature spell, which means Monastery Mentor will trigger and generate you this 1/1 white monk creature token with prowess. Same situation with Invasion of Belenon, which is a siege. That means a non-creature spell, but it does generate a 2/2 white knight with vigilance. So 3 mana, you get a 2/2, and you get a trigger from Monastery Mentor. And also, it is a battle, and if you flip it, it creates an anthem. So all your creature gets +1/+1. By the way, the anthem that you also cast, keep that in mind. The backside of the battles is cast again, so it will trigger the prowess, and it will generate another 1/1 white monk. Only then it's going to be a 2/2 monk, because of course anthem works. Only then it's going to be a 3/3 monk, because of course the power triggers. The prowess. It won't get 3/3 instantly, but every spell that you cast is going to make it into a 3/3. So you're getting a huge boost of value, and it's very worth to flip Invasion of Belenon. And because you're going to generate monks and you want to also generate a lot of creature, things like Inspired Charge might be slightly better in this deck, because obviously your monks are getting +3/+2 when you cast that, and also you generate a potential blocker on the swing back if your attack is not lethal. So all those cards have like small pieces of synergy with Monastery Mentor, and maybe they're not as strong in a normal deck, but as soon as Monastery Mentor appears, Sunder the Gateway is going to be slightly better. Also, you have cards from other colors that will work quite well with Monastery Mentor, and the package that I showed you before in white. And I'm thinking about cards like Ral's Reinforcements, 1 and a red sorcery that creates 2 1/1 blue and red elemental creature tokens, because obviously it generates more bodies. So, for example, your plan with Inspired Charge is becoming much stronger when you have multiple bodies. And it's a spell, so it might generate those monks with prowess. You get cards like Ren's Resolve, exile top 2 cards of your library until end of next turn. You may play those cards, because that lets you want to have cheap stuff in that kind of a deck. So Ren's Resolve will very frequently be 2 mana, draw 2 cards. And you get things like Marauding Dreadship, which is, again, a creature, sort of creature, because it's a vehicle that is not a creature spell, which will also trigger the monk and put multiple bodies on the board as well. So quite a cool combination for that deck. And then, of course, once you have this package, you can think about other red creatures with prowess, which are a couple of, they're going to be very good because they will synergize with the mentor. So the cards that you put for the mentor are going to be also good with those cards, and that's going to increase the power of your deck. What you want to avoid is put cards that are bad and trigger prowess. There is like one red mana trick that gives +1/+0 and first strike and scries. That maybe is just too weak for that. You still want your cards to be strong, but you want them maybe to put more value on synergy rather than sheer power when you have that cards. And you want to also maximize on the ways that the synergy is working. So you have mentor. I would heavily prioritize anything else with prowess in that deck, because that means that even if you don't draw the mentor, you have something that will get a reasonable benefit from you having those maybe slightly lower power but more synergistic cards in your deck. So another build around that I looked at is Scroll Shift itself. I know already before even touching the first cards in the format that I'm probably going to draft that card too much. It's not super strong, but it is an enticing effect. Again, 2 and a white for an instant that blinks artifact, creature, or enchantment, and then returns it to the battlefield, and you draw a card. So yeah, mana cost is there, but at least it replaces itself in your hand by the cantrip. And then it all depends on what you're going to get back by blinking something. And in white, I selected Phyrexian Awakening, 2 and a white enchantment. Scroll Shift can blink enchantments. When it enters the battlefield, you incubate 4. So you generate this incubator token with 4+1/+1 counters. And then for 2 mana, you can transform it. And also it says Phyrexians you control have vigilance. Obviously, if you blink it, you get another incubate 4, which is quite a good value for 3 mana and draw a card. Then another card that you can get is Knight of the New Coalition. It's a human knight with vigilance. Also, I mean, on Phyrexian Awakening, there is also a black-white version of that enchantment that incubates 3, and all the Phyrexian gets +1/+1. So if you have a bunch of those cards, Scroll Shift gains in value for me. Of course, if you have a bunch of those cards, there are other cards that will gain in value for me. Like there is a 2 and a white 2/2 flyer that when it connects with the opponent or a battle can transform an incubator token. So you actually what it means in your deck, it basically saves you 2 mana on flipping that incubator into a Phyrexian creature, and I think that would be also pretty decent in that deck. But of course, if you're playing slightly maybe less Phyrexian centric version, there are things like Knight of the New Coalition, the 3 and a white that I already told you that generates a knight when it ETBs, so you can Scroll Shift this one. There are cards with backup that can distribute +1/+1 counters that you can blink to get that effect. Again, very often during the attack of the opponent by chumping something and blinking it, you also save yourself a bunch of life, which again gives you time to do more shenanigans. But it's not only in white that things for Scroll Shift exist. A particularly good card for that is Converter Beast, a 4 mana 0/1, which doesn't sound like a good thing, but it incubates 5 when it ETBs. So it's basically a 6 mana 5/5 and an 0/1. But if you Scroll Shift the Converter Beast once, you draw a card and you get another of those incubate 5 tokens. And those are pretty substantial in terms of size. You have a card like Wildwood Escort, the 5 mana Gravedigger. So if you blink it, you will get another creature from your graveyard to your hand, which is a neat effect. And you have another one of those Phyrexian enchantments. And I think that those Phyrexian enchantments are particularly attractive with Scroll Shift. So maybe once in the format, you will be able to draft some sort of Abzan Phyrexian enchantment tribal, when you will end up with having a bunch of those incubate tokens with reach +1/+1 and vigilance and win games like this. So Tangled Skyline not only generates you an incubator with 5+1/+1 counters, but also gains you 5 life. So scroll shift has that additional extra value of blinking it by gaining extra 5 life and prolonging the game yet again. So these are the sort of cards that I want to be working with when I have scroll shift, but I'm sure there's a bunch of other ones in other colors that you can try to dabble in. I thought that the green-white version was the one that was most attractive to me because, again, you can tap into the natural green-white mechanic, and in this set, it's putting counters on something, which means you're going to have probably backup creatures as well as those Phyrexian enchantments, and those backup creatures again might generate some additional synergy from your main synergy, which will be the +1/+1 counters by putting extra +1/+1 counters on something. So again, trying to build it more as a pocket of synergy than as an all-in scroll shift deck, and then tapping into your main synergy and using scroll shift to maximize it in some cases, but to add value on its own with things like Converter Beast and Tangled Skyline. Oh, this is an interesting build around proposition. I don't know if it's going to be good, but it's there. So there is a card in this set, which is a common, and that's always a good sign if there is a common that you can try to build around. In Saiba Cryptomancer, and that's a 1 and a blue Moonfolk Ninja. It has Flash, it has Backup 1, and it has Hexproof. Now, most of the time, this card is going to be used as a trick. You flash it in, you give something hexproof, you save it from... Thank you, Bailey, for your contributions to the stream. Bailey. Bailey, stop it. The joys of having a dog. Bailey, come on, behave. So normally you play it as a combat trick. So basically you flash it in, you give something +1/+1 and hexproof, and you're left with this meaningless 0/1 body. But I thought it's a very cheap creature with hexproof, and we know how Boggle works. We know what a cheap hexproof creature can do to the constructed format even. So why not use it as a target for some kind of aura strategy? The problem is there are not so many auras, but I am pretty sure that things like Crystal Carapace are going to be going dead last a lot of the time. So why not build a deck when you play Saiba Cryptomancer and then dump a bunch of Crystal Carapaces on top of it and create this Voltron kind of creature? There is also another aura called Astral Wingspan. That's 4 and a blue for a Convoke aura. It gives the enchanted creature +2/+2 and flying, and also you draw a card when it ETBs, which is great with Saiba Cryptomancer because you can play it on it, draw the card, and you have very low risk of that being blown out with removal, so you can actually play it into the open mana and not care that much. And Crystal Carapace, by the way, is a 3 and a green aura that gives the creature +3/+3 and ward 2, which is slightly weird on a hexproof creature, but okay. It also has cycling, so even if you don't draw your Saiba Cryptomancers, you can cycle them away. And also cards like Cosmic Hunger are going to gain something in that kind of strategy because you can play your bite spells and you have also low risk of that being blown out, which is great because you can play that into open mana again and not being afraid of removal 2-for-1ing you. Yeah, I think that you can probably get, average you will get 2.4 Saiba Cryptomancers per draft. But if you pick it early, you will probably be able to get like 3 of them. And also like other things will be synergizing with it. There's a bunch of cards that put counters on it. There is the Fertilite something, the 4 mana instant that puts 2/2/2 +1/+1 counters on a target and ramps you. So you can play that kind of a card. That also allows splashing, and because you can splash, you can maybe add the short sword that gives vigilance or something that gives vigilance to Saiba Cryptomancer, and there you can start slamming with your Voltronized creature and keep it for blocks as well, and you can start building on it from there. I'm only giving you idea here rather than the full-fledged build around. Another card that I thought might be an interesting concept for a build around is Omen Hawker. And that's a 1-mana 1/1 that has tap, add colorless and blue. Spend this mana only to activate abilities. And whenever I see a 1-mana card that can give 2 mana, I see tons of potential. And obviously, the 1/1 body is not so great, but you can probably quickly accrue some value out of it. So things that I thought about Omen Hawker: first, the transform creatures. You got a 2-drop in Order of the Mirror. That's a 2/1 knight, but for 3 and a Phyrexian white, you can transform it as a sorcery, and it flips into a 3/3 creature with flanking, which flanking makes it very, very difficult to block. So if you play turn 1 Omen Hawker, on turn 3, you can play Order of the Mirror, and you can transform it instantly, and you end up with this 3/3 flanker. You pay 2 life, but that's a pretty good deal. And there are a bunch of other transform creatures, cheaper or more expensive, that you could play with Omen Hawker, because you can always play the transform costs with the mana. Second thing that you can do is Eyes of Gitaxias. Gitaxias. Eyes of Gitaxias. That's a 2 and a blue sorcery, and it says incubate 3, draw a card. So in a normal world, you do that on turn 3, and on turn 4, you can transform the incubator token. However, with Omen Hawker, you can play this on turn 3, and at the same turn, you can already flip it. Therefore, you just played yourself a sort of 3-mana Saruth Packmate, because you have a 3/3 creature and you drew a card. And then, of course, Eyes of Gitaxias comes with other capabilities. So, for example, later in the game, you have this trick that target creatures' base power and toughness become 4/3. That, of course, makes Eyes of Gitaxias into a 7/6, which is great. So you have those kinds of abilities with Eyes of Gitaxias itself. And another ability that you can pump your mana from Omen Hawker into is the land cycling, because it is still a creature ability. So you can pay that mana with Omen Hawker. So you can play it on turn 1, and on turn 2 you play a 2-drop, and at the end of the opponent's turn you can maybe cycle one of those creatures and make sure that you have a land in your play, and that also allows some shenanigans with splashing cards. So you can maybe play the off-color transforming creatures and stuff like that. So there's plenty of small things that you can do with Omen Hawker. And again, it's an uncommon, but I'm pretty sure that at least initially you will probably be able to get some of those Omen Hawkers quite easily. Right, more build-arounds. And this is going to be a multiple build-around that I'm going to propose here. It's based on Sram, the Senior Edificer. 1 and a white 2/2 legendary dwarf advisor. Whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle spell, draw a card. This is a rare, and it's in the Multiverse Legend slot of the packs. But I think that it will be a rare that will go relatively late, because people on Arena should have it because it was in previous sets. So those that are interested in Constructed are not going to maybe rare draft it. And the ability is not that strong in this format in particular, because, as I told you, not so many auras, some equipment, and some vehicles. But there are some really solid cards there. Yes, SRAM in Polish is maybe a bit sus. Yeah, it does mean defecate, to be fair. Thank you, Moomin, for pointing that out in the chat. It also is Mars spelled backwards, if anyone is interested. So, in terms of auras, equipment, and vehicles that you have, Realmbreaker's Grasp is the new version of Pacifism. It's basically a 2-mana arrest, which is a great rate on it. And I'm traditionally low on the Pacifism effects, but I'm pretty sure that this one is going to be decent. And of course, it's going to be more decent if it draws you a card when you have SRAM in play. Another one, Core Halbert, is an equipment. It's a short sword. It does cost 1 white to play, and then equip 1, and then equip creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance. And I think that this is a decent ability in aggressive decks in this format that you want to have anyway. So if you have SRAM, it's sort of like one free card that you wanted to have anyway, and now it does something more. Another card that I'm quite excited to play together with SRAM is Marauding Dreadship, a 2 and a red vehicle. It's a 4/1 with haste, and when it enters the battlefield, it incubates, and it has crew 2. So you need to tap creature with 2 power when you play it. And SRAM is a perfect thing to do that because you don't want to put SRAM in combat. Therefore, you play the Marauding Dreadship on 3, draw a card, you activate it, you swing with the Marauding Dreadship. And you're left with, even if someone is chomping the Marauding Dreadship, you're going to be left with that incubate token. So this is a card that you probably also want to be playing in the red-white anyway. So SRAM is a sort of like free rolling card draw based on that. So these are the three sort of basic things that I think you will be putting when you're playing those when you play SRAM in your deck, or these are the things that you want to have in order to put SRAM in your deck. But there are a couple of other things that you might want to think in doubling on the synergies. Another card from the Multiverse Legends that I think will fit there really perfectly is Rayaf, Mastersmith, red and a white dwarf artificer, and it's a 2/2. And whenever a creature you control that enchanted or equipped attacks, that creature gains double strike until end of turn. And obviously, it's going to be great with Core Halberd. So if you put it on a 2/2, you get a 3/3 double striker with Vigilance, which is great. And then some other cards that are maybe minor are going to be improved by that, like Kite Sail, a 2-mana equipment with an equip cost of 2, where equipped creature gets +1/+0 and has flying, because flying double strikers are a good thing. And also a card that I'm quite high on in general in this format when you're going to have a sort of go wide aggressive decks is Remosian Greatsword, 4 and a red equipment. It has Convoke, so it can cost much cheaper than that. Again, the fact that you probably don't want to put SRAM into combat is great because it can Convoke the Remosian Greatsword. It has equip cost of 2, but for that 2 mana you get +3/+1 and Trample. Again, with Rayaf, +3/+1 Trample double strike is a great bonus on any creature, so that's fantastic. And I would very much love to play it, especially when you get to draw a card by playing it. And of course, apart from those pieces, you want to play those solid, aggressively statted creatures in white and red, and enjoy a beatdown just by putting this kind of extra synergy package that makes your game either more powerful with Rayaf or more grindy with SRAM. So I think these are great additional plans you can put into the red-white. Weird build around-ish thing. And again, I'm not suggesting that you should first pick Quende, Prince of Femref. For the listeners, 3 and a white, legendary creature, human knight. It's a 2/2 with double strike, and creature you control with first strike have double strike. I'm just saying that maybe in some decks, you are going to be happy to late pick Quende and utilize some of the synergies and maybe boost some cards up a bit in your evaluation. So cards I'm thinking that would fit with Quende is Swordsworn Cavalier, a 1 and a white human knight. It is a 3/1. And when it has first strike, as long as another knight entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So if you play the Swordsworn Cavalier on 2, on turn 3 you can play another knight, and it gets the first strike. You can easily attack with it. There's nothing that's going to be blocking it. And on turn 4 you play Quende, which is a knight, which triggers Swordsworn Cavalier, which gives it first strike, which gives it double strike, and you swing with the 3/1 double striker on turn 4. That will probably require a champ block already, and that champ block is going to be important because it's a 0/1, and you're going to start being on the front foot, and then Quende being 2/2 double striker is going to be quite useful in that stage. Another thing useful with Quende is coming in hot. I think the trick is going to be generally poor, but if you have Quende in your deck, it actually can be pretty decent. It's a 1 mana instant, it costs red. and target creature gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn, and you scry 1. So you can surprisingly give something double strike, and well, that can be a devastating effect, especially for 1 mana. On top of that, you have Red Cap Heel Slasher. I don't know if this card is going to be great. It's a 3 and a red Goblin Rogue. It's a 2/3, but it has backup 1 and it has first strike. So if it enters the battlefield, it can give something else first strike. If you have Gwenda on board, that means that it will give a double strike, which is way better than giving it first strike. And it's still, 2/3 first striker is not nothing, and you can make it into a 3/4 first striker if you don't have any other good targets to put the counters on, which is also decent. So those 3 cards, like a very small synergy package with Quende. And again, I'm not saying that you have to play it, but I'm just saying that it's good to know that this package exists, and maybe sometimes you will be able to utilize it efficiently. Another card, and that might be controversial to some, that I'm thinking might be better in this format than it was in this original one, is Rada Coalition Warlord. It's a 2 red-green elf warrior, legendary creature. It has domain. It's a 3/3. It has domain whenever Rada Coalition Warlord becomes tapped. Another target creature you control gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. And I think that Rada is you can easily imagine Rada in a deck that has 2 colors and a splash of the third one. So the domain is going to be 3 quite a lot. And the problem with Rada and Dominaria United was that whenever it attacked, it got blocked. So it was basically a one-time effect. Now, March of the Machine has one mechanic that will help utilizing Rada more efficiently, and that's Convoke. You have spells with Convoke, which means that you can tap Rada as part of the cost of that spell. And of course, as soon as it becomes tapped, it will give power to a creature you control. You can do it in combat, you can do it pre-combat, and I think that's going to be a neat interaction. Another thing that I think makes Rada slightly better is the Marauding Dreadship, the vehicle, because of course you can tap Rada to crew Marauding Dreadship, and you want to play Marauding Dreadship anyway, and then you get this extra bonus for tapping it. +2/+2 or +3/+3 is going to be great on some other creature. And another thing that I find attractive with Rada is Trashing Frontliner, because it's a 2 mana 2/2 with trample, and giving this big boost in power to something that already has trample is going to be even better. And of course, Trashing Frontliner is even stronger when you are having some of your own battles, because then you can attack a battle with it. It gets additional +1/+1. So all of a sudden, even if you only play red-green, Thrashing Frontliner can become a 5/5 trampler very quickly and make sure that you're going to win the battle. Yeah, I mean, these are the build-arounds that I went slightly deeper on, but there are plenty of other cards that I think are semi-build-arounds. I think one important card is Krasus Depth Guard. For those that didn't play M21, there was a card there called Drowsy Tyrannodon, aka Drowsy T. It was a 2 mana 3/3 defender with if it has power of 4 or more, if you control a creature with power of 4 or more, it can attack as though it didn't have a defender. Krasus is very much similar to that. It is slightly worse because 2 mana 3/3 is way better than 3 mana 4/3, but still it's a big creature, and I think that it will be able to be a pocket of synergy in many decks, especially thanks to the backup mechanic that makes it trivially easy to put a counter on Krasus. There is another card that I think might be quite interesting as a build-around in Tiller of Flesh. That's a 3 and a white Phyrexian Knight. It's a 2/4. And whenever you cast a spell that targets 1 or more permanents, you incubate 2. And that's interesting as maybe an addition to decks that already have lots of cards that target something. So bunch of removal. You can put a Tiller of Flesh. But it also makes cards like the 2/2 flyer that transforms incubators into a slightly better card because you get this additional value. There is a bunch of interesting build-around cards in the Multiverse Legend. And I mentioned Karuga, but there's also Obosh, which I think you can actually companion on occasions. Especially, I'm interested in the combo of Obosh, and there is the Cyclops, the 5-drop, a 5/4 that when it taps, it deals 2 damage to a battle or a player. With Obosh, it of course is going to be 4 damage, which is a good clock with an unblockable creature. There is going to be Gyruda, which can have some kind of combo potential. I don't think that you can companion Gyruda probably, but you definitely can play it in the main deck and make sure that you're having some of those even mana things. Like, for example, the Land Cyclers that cost 6 mana, all of them. So they will work very well with Gyruda, which mills 4 cards from both players, and then you can choose a creature with even mana value and put it onto the battlefield from the milled cards. And one card that I selected for the slide was Lathiel, the Bounteous Dawn. That's 2 green-white for a legendary unicorn. It has lifelink. It's a 2/2. And at the beginning of each end step, if you gained life this turn, distribute up to that many +1/+1 counters among any number of other target creatures. So I can imagine that you're going to play Lathiel and attack with your 2/2 lifelinker for 2 mana. And even if it gets blocked, you're going to put counters on something else. You got Gainlands that you can play. That will also mean you put a +1/+1 counter on something. You have a couple of other cards that will gain you life that you can use quite efficiently and make Lethiel your sort of mini pocket of synergy. So that card looks like an interesting potential. Also keeping in mind that this is a mini build around that also puts counters, which is the main theme of the white-green. So it generates its own pocket of synergy, but at the same time, it amplifies your main synergy of deck, which makes it always a neat build around because these intertwining synergies are going to make your deck so much stronger than the sum of its parts. And also, I think that there is a bunch of wombo combos, cards that are good together. And an example here that I have is Furnace Gremlin, 1 in a red Gremlin. It's a 1/2. For 1 in red, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. And when it dies, you incubate X, where X is its power. And this card is going to be very annoying because it's going to be hard to block because people will not want to yield the extra value from it. But you can also keep it as a blocker. And if you have Zalfirin's Shapecraft, and if your opponent attacks you, you can play Zalfirin's Shapecraft on the Furnace Gremlin, making into a 4/3. Zalfirin's Great Shapecraft makes a creature into a 4/3 until end of turn, and you draw a card. And then, of course, if you trade it off, you will also get an incubator token with 4 +1/+1 counters. So I think that's a pretty neat combination. And there's a bunch of those like 2-card kind of mini combos that I would be interested in playing. Right, I think that's what I had for the seminar today. So I would like to thank the 17 Lens team who are providing all of us, and it seems me in particular because I'm using it the most with the data that we can utilize, analyze, and share with others. So Viral Misnomer, Hululu, Grant Wu, and especially Ale Ballini, ZTM, who is now responsible for making sure new sets hit the system as soon as the set is released. So he's working like quadruple shifts to make sure that everything works. And I would like to thank Fake Jake Brown, my Secret Santa's helper, the person who helps me to release this in a podcast form and in a podcast that sounds way better than the live stream that you're listening to right now, chat. And as we are on the topic of the podcast, I would like to thank Esescu and very aptly named Mana Junkie, who created the music I'm using in the podcast version of it. And of course, thanks to the patrons and thanks to the MTGAzone.com for sponsoring me. And with that, I'll see you next week, when we are going to be probably talking about the very early data from MUM.